Okay, so hi everyone. I'm Samantha from A Whimsical Wood Yarn Company. And yesterday on my Instagram, I tried to do a live. I did do a live. And the live worked for the most part, except for the coolest part of my live where I was trying to explain assigned pooling and planned pooling, what the difference is, how to know what yarn that you're buying will do what, and what the yarns look like when you just knit with them and you're not doing assigned pooling, for example, in a sweater, or if you're not doing planned pooling. So I thought, because I was so bummed that video didn't work out, because here in the Enchanted Forest we don't have very good internet. So I thought I would just record a YouTube video so that it would be clear, excuse me, throughout the video. I'm slopping my coffee everywhere. So I'm going to do that, and here's a reminder, I'm not a professional, so this probably won't be the best quality either, but let's get started. So first, this is an assway. These are the asses that I started dyeing a long time ago, years and years ago, and they will do planned pooling, okay? They don't work for assigned pooling. And how you can tell that when you're looking at something like in a yarn store or online is, with mine, you can tell because I skein them so that you can see exactly what's happening with it. There are 4 sections of color in these skeins. So it's space dyed yarn. So it's like half and half. Half of it's one color and half of it's another color. Sometimes I do multiple colors on one half and then this half is more solid, but for the most part, you can see that they're half and half. If you open these up, my cats are going crazy. If you open these up, they'll have 4 sections of color, so I'll show you that. We open this one up so that you can see it. There's 2 blue sections, 1, 2, and then 2 of the creamy speckled sections. 4 sections, okay? So those will work for planned pooling. But then if you come over here and you look at this skein, which is called Rainbow Shit, and this one is Rainbow Ass, I turned this planned pooling color into an assigned pooling color. And you have to forgive my crappy lighting, but this one has 4 sections, and if you open this one up, it's only 2, and most of it's gonna be this off-white with speckles, and then there'll be like a color burst, I like to call it, of another color. So all of this is one color, and then we have this hand-painted rainbow section here. This is what you're looking for when you want to buy a yarn that will work for assigned pooling. I like my skeins to be extra long in circumference, so that when you're doing assigned pooling patterns, you have more time in between whatever stitch you're gonna do. So some of the shorter squatty skeins, I call them, they're not very big in circumference, like Barker Wools, for example. Mad Tosh, they will work, but it's harder in my patterns because you don't have enough time in between color bits. Okay, so now to further confuse you, both of these versions of yarn will work for planned pooling, but only this one will work for assigned pooling. It has to be 2 sections of yarn, and one taking up 3/4 of the skein, and then the other, or more than 3/4 actually. So a main color and then a little blurb of a contrasting color, a standout color for assigned pooling. Planned pooling, you can use both. Assigned pooling, only this guy. So on my website, I made an assigned pooling yarn category, and it has just yarns dyed like these, and we're now calling them shits so that people can distinguish. And then it has a planned pooling collection section so that you can see both of these types of yarn are in there. Okay, so now what is planned pooling? Planned pooling, if you're using Rainbow Ass, for example, here's an example. Okay, so this is the planned pooling ass hat, and it's knit with this color, and you can see that the hat has 4 sections of color. There are 2 rainbow sections, 1, 2, and then 2 of the white speckly sections. Okay, here we have Yorick modeling. This is the hat that's in the actual pattern. If you look at it on my website or on Ravelry, it's called Smitten Ass, fingering weight. Oh wow, the cats are on some type of kitty crack. Again, 4 sections of color, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so planned pooling is when you use, most people who are professionals, use math and measurements to determine how many stitches they need per whatever skein of yarn that they have in order to get the colors to stack on top of each other or be placed in a certain way so that they show up in the order they were put at on the yarn. I think maybe it started out being called color stacking. I don't know, back in the 1990s. I can't remember for sure, but it's been around a long time. Why is my coffee cup leaking? Anyway, so planned pooling. So the planned pooling ass hat is one of my favorite things to knit because I just take it everywhere and on the go. I always have several of them going on the needles. Once you get the hang of it, it's super easy and super fun, and it makes sense to me because, especially with hand-dyed yarn, because dyers put the colors on the skein when they're space dyeing in a visual way that's appealing. So it makes sense to me to knit that exactly how the dyer intended them to be seen, right? Because when you make a shawl out of planned pooling yarns or asses, you don't get that effect. So this pattern is called the Ass Fade, and I wrote it a long time ago. It's probably not super written, but it's really simple, and it's 3 skeins of asses. So when you knit an ass, you stitch count. You see what they do? They pool, and as your stitch count changes, the pooling changes. See, we're getting bigger, and you can tell. I don't remember what this first ass is called. I'm having a brain fart, but the second one there is unicorn ass. You can see it clear here as we come up. There's unicorn ass. See the pooling? Then we have bear ass, which is barely an ass at all. And then back into unicorn ass. And then as we get bigger and bigger, the pooling changes. And it's just kind of all over the place. And some people, they don't like that. They don't like pooling, period. But if you plan pool things, you can get it to look just exactly how you want it. So you can plan pool, like I said, with both styles of yarn, assigned pooling and plan pooling. The difference will be, like, if you're making a hat, the asses or the plan pooling yarns will have 4 color sections, just like on the yarn skein. Like if you unwrap it and you see the 4. And the assigned pooling yarns will only have 2, okay? Just like it's dyed on the skein. So like this skein, I can tell by looking at my hat, was mostly gray, and then I had a rainbow section of color. And I used tension. I don't use any math. It's all about the cast on and whatever. So that, because I'm like super lazy. But then once I got it to how I wanted it to pool, I used tension to get my, so I either pulled tight or loosened up my tension to get my colors to go the way I wanted them to. And that's why it looks like that. There's no math, no nothing. I just pulled that directly out of my ass and boom, there it is. This is Moody Ass, I think. But anyway, so assigned pooling yarns will create an ass hat, a planned pooling ass hat with 2 sections of color. And asses will create a planned pooling ass hat with 4 sections of color. Now you can apply this to many different things like cowls and sweaters and whatever if you want. If you're using planned pooling asses and you knit a sock, sock knitters love this type of dyed yarn because they micro stripe. See the tiny little baby micro stripes? It's so cute. This is St. Patty's Ass 2.0, I think. However, so this is knit probably on a 0 or a 1, these socks, and you get tiny little micro stripes. If you were to have bigger needles, you'd get a little bit bigger stripes maybe. But I've seen socks knit with these asses that do, I'm gonna grab this hat to show you. Like if you have a size 2 needle and you 64 stitches or maybe larger, like I saw a men's sock probably had more than 64 stitches on it. In one of these colors, it was the Fuck Cancer Assway Edition color, knit by a gentleman named Joey. And his sock did this up it. It was really, really cool. I wish I had a picture of it to show you, but I don't. So sometimes you can get this too. So knitting with these for socks creates pretty bitchin', pretty cool looking effects with no pooling at all. You just knit them. I had a sock that I showed the other day. I think I might have taken it downstairs. I did. Okay, so I showed you a shawl that's just knit, no pooling with an ass. I showed you a sock with planned pooling yarn. So let's get into what these will do when you're knitting in the round, like for an example in a sweater. Oh, I didn't explain assigned pooling. Let's do that first. Okay, so assigned pooling is different than planned pooling because you're not using math or measurements. And even if you're lazy, you're not color stacking. What you're doing is you're knitting along. So this is the Happy Clusters hat pattern. It's the demo for it. So it's got different stitches in it. But one of the stitches offered is this stitch. And then this one, and then there's a heart stitch, and there's also like a seashell or a little tornado looking thing. I can't remember what I call them all. Excuse me, it's early and I'm a coffee whore. Okay, so anyway, assigned pooling is when you knit along. Like the hat starts out, you're just knitting. So this is what it did when I was knitting in the round with this amount of stitches. You just knit along, and when you come to that color burst section in your assigned pooling yarn, you make whatever stitch has been designated to that color section. So in this example, you can choose what stitch you make because I'm awesome and I gave you options. I also have a Pinup Rainbow shawl and a Pinup Rainbows cowl. I don't have the shawl here. It's at a yarn shop in Minnesota, but I'll show it to you. So I'll show the cowl version. So this is the Pinup Rainbows cowl, and you just knit along until you come to the color section, and then you make a rainbow, see? So that's assigned pooling, so very different than planned pooling. And the reason that yarns dyed like this won't work for it is because there's too many color sections. So there's no way I could get, because you'd knit a little bit, make another rainbow, knit a little bit, make another rainbow, or make another stitch, and there just isn't room. You have to have fewer color sections and more space between the color sections for assigned pooling to work. Okay, so are we clear? Planned pooling, we're stacking colors depending on our cast on and our tension and maybe math, but not for me. And you get effects like this. And assigned pooling, very different. You're creating stitches that are designated to your color burst in your yarn, okay? Assigned pooling also has been around forever. It's just been brought back into popularity recently, but there are patterns dating back to the 90s as well. If I were older, I may be able to give you more information, but I'm just going off what I can remember. Excuse me, so it's definitely not a new concept. So if you were to take an assigned pooling yarn and knit a sock, I don't have my sock, it's downstairs and I'm too lazy to go get it. But I do have a sloppy, my husband's gonna come home and be loud, so just FYI. I do have a sloppy sleeve. When I was doing the video yesterday, my yarn became completely untangled and now it's a hot mess. But socks will look like this. Well, actually, socks will look like this. This is DK weight, so it's a little bit different. But basically, your socks are gonna do cute little things like this. And if you go on my Instagram and look at the live that I did recently, if you fast forward past the part where there's no connection and everything's shit, I do show the sock a couple of times. But you can see, this is what assigned pooling yarn does basically in a sock. And then your planned pooling could do a variety of different things, but here's the planned pooling micro stripes. And here's the assigned pooling, whatever you want to call that. Okay. So if you were to knit a sweater that's knit in the round with assigned pooling yarn, you could, this is a bottom-up sweater, you could assign pool it, right? So I've got rainbows at the bottom of my sweater, but it started out like this. So in the round knitting, so it depends on your circumference. So the bigger I would get, so if I kept casting on, the thinner this rainbow stripe would be. And if it's really big, it would end up looking more like this again. But so I did assigned pooling at the bottom of the sweater, and then I broke away from the assigned pooling, and I just, you can see it right there, and I just started knitting, knowing that it would do this. So if my circumference of my sweater was smaller, these would be, these little lightning bolt rainbows would be shifting more up and down, and really small, they would be going this way. And so the smaller I get, the more they're gonna shift to the right. And the larger I get, they're gonna shift to the left. And if it's really big, they're gonna completely disappear and it'll be more like this. Okay, asses would do the exact same thing, only for larger circumferences, you'll have 4 sections of, like, say this is a rainbow, for example. You'd have 4 of these if you were doing an ass way. Here I only have 2. 1, 2, and then I have 2. So this is assigned pooling yarn here. You double that up for this. And then the larger you got, the more stitches you have, you'd get stripes with an assway. Micro stripes, but still stripes. Your sleeves would be different knit with this. They would look more like the bottom of this hat here. You know, and as your stitch counts change, it would thin out and then eventually probably micro stripe towards the top of the sleeve, like right here where you're getting bigger. This is a signed pooling yarn sleeve, so it started out, you can kind of see that the little blurbs did kind of pool, but there's a line, a space between them. And then as I got bigger, we did a little bit of pooling here, and you can see that it, let me see if the other side has, there we go. See how it pools? So there's some pooling on my sleeve for the assigned pooling. And then once I stopped changing my stitch count, it evens back out, okay? So now, with all that knowledge, what do you think is gonna happen when I add 2 sleeves to this pattern? This is gonna go away, this little lightning bolt that I have going on here. And the stitches from this sleeve are gonna be added and another sleeve are gonna be added. So I'm gonna have a shit ton of stitches. So we're gonna get a crazy kind of, it'll be all over the place because it'll be huge. And then it will pool in different ways like this in the yoke up to the neckline, where it'll end up being, the neckline will actually be similar to a hat. So hopefully that makes sense. If you knit assigned pooling yarns back and forth, like in a cardigan, you get a lot of this. This is kind of what it looks like. Asses, these guys, the plan pooling ones, they're more of a hot mess, no matter what you do with them. They look really cool, but if you're not into that type of thing, you may not want to knit a sweater with an ass, a plan pooling yarn. Okay, so I think that basically covers plan pooling, the difference between plan pooling and assigned pooling. I explained assigned pooling. I showed you some samples. And I think that's it. All right, so I'll post a link to this video on my Instagram, and feel free to leave a comment on YouTube if you have questions. And you can always email me at whimsicalwoodyarn@gmail.com if you happen to buy any of my assigned pooling or planned pooling pattern, or anything really. And I won't bite your face off, and I'll try my best to be helpful, okay? Have a happy day. Hugs and shit.